a priority just because they are the countries most seriously affected by the existing economic relations. In our view, this conference must give an essential contribution to the realization of fundamental principles upon which this new international economic order should be founded. Mr. President, our delegation is convinced that it is now the time to consider comprehensively the problems related to human settlements and agree on standpoints which are to represent the basis for taking steps to solve these problems both in particular countries and on the international level. Human settlements such as they are now and the trend of their development that could be envisaged do not correspond to the hopes of our world and are becoming increasingly inadequate for a man as a social and natural creature. Physical growth is more the characteristic of human settlements than it is their qualitative development. What we know and stand for today does not still give the right answer to what the town really means for the life of its inhabitants, their work, economic growth, cultural policy, environment, and the development of civilization as a whole. The greatest part of the development problems is today, as always in the history of civilization, reflected in the life of a town. The results less and less correspond to the needs of the people and to the prospects of their development. However, it is clear that under conditions of uncontrolled urbanization based on exploitation of people, space and resources, with profit being the main motivation, the town is less and less a place which can offer a dignified life to its inhabitants. The development of town until now reflected the image of the world. The progress of one part was achieved at the cost of the other, both within particular countries and at the world level. Misery and poverty increased together with wealth. Continuation of the existing trend of the development of a large part of human settlements, however improved, is not acceptable. The developing countries cannot solve the problem of housing and settlements under conditions of the existing economic relations in the world. Any attempt to change the image of the town, not taking into account the economic, social, and political development, is the unrealistic one, both concerning the developing countries and the developed ones. The belief that the desired quantitative transformation of human settlements could be reached by applying the methods of planning, often to be found in our national recommendations, is on the whole inadequate. The very essence of the problem is not to be found in the identification of symptoms or in the methods of planning or technology of construction or in good wishes expressed in our plans, but in the need to change social and economic relations. The settlements have always been and will continue to be a reflection of the society in which they were founded. That is why the qualitative transformation of settlements could only be achieved as a part of the transformation of economic and social relations. That is also one of the reasons why we cannot accept the opinion that the unsatisfactory state of settlements is due to demographic explosion, because it itself is only one of the consequences of poverty brought about by the exploitation of human labor and unequal economic relations still prevailing in the world. Mr. President, our conference will only fulfill its role if it does, without any prejudice or hesitation, face the causes of such a state, and if it indicates the right ways for action and social and material preconditions for their elimination. This is what we in our country do, although we are not exactly satisfied with everything done so far. We come to think that the construction of settlements is not just adding different houses and industrial units, public buildings and free grounds. We are aware that the settlement development makes up the largest part of the building up and transformation of the environment. But what we essentially want to achieve is to make planning and settlement development an integral part of economic, social and cultural policies and the policy of spatial arrangement. This is the only way to make the settlements not only a reflection of the development, but also an active factor and means of progress. Construction of a town, its today and its future, must result from the common determination of its inhabitants, their requirements, habits, and potentialities, and must provide them, in addition to create a certain standard of living, the continuity of development of one's personality and surroundings and permanent enrichment of these values. It is within this context that our architectural heritage should be protected and renewed, our towns enriched by what our national culture and values could give. While planning and developing the settlements, optimum possibilities for all the necessary functions should be ensured. Housing, recreation, different services and infrastructure, while at the same time equal attention should be paid to working facilities and industrial plants. In the materials for this conference, an adequate place was not given to the latter, although the precondition for the development of settlements is by all means the wealth of people. Investments in economic activities must also include investments in housing and social standards. We have observed that as a developing country, we do not have to go through all the phases that the developed countries did, but that we should analyze the experiences and find our own way of development according to our own conditions in a shorter period and with less economic, social, and other adverse effects. Aware of all efforts we have made and results we have achieved, we can say that the Yugoslav society has ensured some of the essential prerequisites for the realization of aims of development of human settlements, like the following: social ownership over the natural resources and means of production, nationalization of building grounds with the aim to carry out urban development to the benefit of all, measures and policies in order to speed up development of underdeveloped areas, continuous long-term planning and settlement of development, participation of citizens in the process of planning and development, as well as their decision-making in the communes and working organizations about all issues important for life and settlement development. These prerequisites are written down in our legislation and formulated in detail in the document of the Federal Assembly on the basis for long-term policy of town planning and spatial arrangement. This document is being implemented in accordance with Yugoslav federal and communal order. It is in construction and development of human settlements that the Yugoslav socialist and self-managed society sees one of its most important duties, the result of which will be the creation of life conditions worthy of man. In the same field of the human settlements development, Yugoslavia will give its contribution to the international community within its possibilities, and on an equal footing, exchanging experiences and friendly cooperation with all countries, regardless of differences in social systems. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the Federal Minister for Energy and Industry of Yugoslavia. I now give the floor to the Minister of Public Works of El Salvador, His Excellency, Mr. Antonio Seaman.
Señor Presidente, honorable.
Mr. President, officers, delegates. First of all, I would like to crave your indulgence to give you time so that we can part of the pictures which we prepared in El Salvador for this conference, in which we shall be able to see the organization which we now have in the field of housing in our country, and then I shall present the message which I shall deliver. Please, may we have the capsule?
La República de El Salvador, ubicada en la América Central, tiene en 20.000 kilómetros cuadrados una población de 4 millones de habitantes.
Population of 4 million inhabitants, El Salvador is a very picturesque country having an enjoyable tropical climate. He is traditionally known as a very hard-working citizen in all fields, and with the course of time, many factors work together to make a population deficit for the most unfavored part of the population because they could not find houses. Gradually, they were ending up in empty areas and thus forming the so-called misery belts. In 1971, we started our basic problem for wiping out these marginal squatter areas. In the very same land where they had set up squatters, 93 families were removed. The houses were revalued to the hell of $700, and they were given between $2.40 to $6 for 20 years. The Social Housing Fund is an aggressive program of Social Security which in 2 years of operation has financed 1,300 houses and has financed 4,600. The average amortization equals 20% of the wages. The fund mobilized in such a short period of time a total of $27 million. The Salvadorian Fund for Housing Development, a private entity, non-profit organization, in 4 years has installed 1,500 families, in other words, about 10,000 people with minimum resources. They are built by the people themselves through the mutual help system. The monthly payments are never more than $10, equal to 10% of the family income, which is very little. And our program of technical help and educational help and giving building materials, whereas the communities contribute labor, land, and other input. The help of this organization promotes local development in order to stop the shift from the country to the town. The Salvador Institute of Farm Transformation, which was set up to bring about land reform in our country, has a dynamic settlement problem in various rural areas. The need to coordinate the efforts of the various public and private housing institutions and similar organizations called for the setting up of a national housing board in urban development, whose main job is to work out national policies and housing and development programs for the urban areas.
Señor Presidente,
Mr. President, human association is a basic condition for the full development of man and an essential characteristic of mankind that has given origin to settlements in different parts of the globe. These have given rise to diverse organizations, cultures which have progressed and culminated in technological achievements that daily marvel us and whose application can either contribute to the peace and well-being of society or can be the basis for its own destruction. In time, man's settlements grew in size with more complex organization and with new and varied collective needs to be satisfied within the conditions of peaceful coexistence, liberty, security, and dignity. El Salvador, one of the 6 countries that make up the Central American Isthmus, is participating in the Habitat Conference with a delegation made up with representatives of governmental and NGOs charged with addressing the problems of human settlements in our country, especially those related to housing programs for the population with least resources. This representation at the highest level demonstrates the special interest that our government has for the universal problem of human settlements, which in El Salvador, with only 21,000 square kilometers and the very high national population density of 204 persons per square kilometer, takes on dramatic characteristics. Conscious, aware of the worsening of this phenomenon and of the need to focus on solutions in a comprehensive manner, the government of El Salvador has put into effect a national transformation policy as a national and native response to the social economic development of the country. Because of its comprehensive approach, our conception of national transformation places fundamental interest on the issues of human settlements. In brief, it can be said that the primary objective of this policy is to reach the highest level of well-being possible for all the population through an increase in the production of goods and services and a better distribution of the same. These objectives are, of course, intimately linked to the theme of this conference. In effect, the National Transformation Policy considers that in order that the structural, social, economic, political, and administrative changes that have to be put into effect contribute to the achievement of overall well-being, it is to promote not only a better distribution of the country's resources, but also a more efficient utilization of the national space, that is, an integration of the entire national territory through the processes of change. The national transformation seeks solutions relevant for this new type of problem, both in the short run as well as in the long run. Otherwise, they would be aggravated by the national population growth, which, even with the efforts that are being waged by the implementation of the national population policy, within 25 years, the country will have a national gross population density of over 400 persons per square kilometer. In addition, the process of industrial transformation, sustained by the process of agrarian transformation, will have reached by this period an accelerated rate of development that will, in addition, have to be equilibrated with the quality of the environment. The process of rural-urban migration will have to be oriented in a way that the settlements surrounding the major cities are prepared for the provision of services for the rural population, which at the same time should be prepared for the migratory process in an orderly and productive way. Our attention to housing, especially for the lower-income families, will continue to have priority so that the existing deficit of services will be minimized. It can be said that the effective solutions will not be reached through traditional approaches that only consider isolated aspects of the system. This implies reforms in the existing institutional apparatus that can respond effectively to the present and future demands of the Salvadorian population. In summary, the National Transformation Strategy is founded first in the process of agrarian transformation and at the same time in the acceleration of the process of industrial development, in the provision of more and better social services, in the raising of employment and productive levels, and as a result, in better incomes for the entire population. Housing, health, and education constitute the fundamental aspects of the national transformation of our country. The National Housing and Urban Development Board is part of the national planning system. This is the principal decision-making body in charge of formulating general policy and specific guidelines for the planning of human settlements and the coordination of the different agencies. As an immediate task, the Commission is formulating and implementing the National Settlement Policy for the orientation of the process of urbanization. To this effect, the National Housing and Urban Development Board sponsored the first National Habitat Seminar on the 16th and 17th of February of this year and gave the opportunity to the various representatives of public and private organizations to discuss the national policy document that expressed the governmental position. From this seminar, there emerged a document entitled Towards a National Human Settlement Policy, which contains 5 major areas of concern and action: environmental, economic, financial, social, institutional, and training of planners. In addition, on the 29th and 30th of April, our government sponsored a regional or Central American conference on human settlements, which had the following two objectives with Guatemala, Costa Rica, Salvador, Honduras, and the purposes, I repeat, were to know and exchange and become acquainted with the experiences of the rest of Central American countries in the area of human settlements, and to analyze the Declaration of Principles and the Program of International Cooperation drawn up by the Preparatory Commission of Habitat in order to present a unified position of the Central American group here in Vancouver. We are aware of the fact that the tasks we have ahead of us in relation to human settlements constitute one of the greatest challenges of our times, but we are conscious of our responsibilities and our creative capacity and of the struggle of the Salvadorian people. Because of this, we are certain that we will be able to face up to the problems and encounter the necessary solutions in order that we may inherit for the future generations a more just society in continuous transformation in search of the enrichment of its children. Salvador, El Salvador, our people and our government would like to take this opportunity to congratulate the PrepCom of this conference for its fine success. Dr. Penelosa, Secretary General, for his tremendous efforts, without which this conference could not have taken place. The United Nations for taking the initiative to promote this conference. The people and the Government of Canada for the efficient organization of this conference in which our country participates, and most especially this lovely city of Vancouver, whose inhabitants have, in spite of its temperate climate, the warmth of our tropical country in their hearts. Thank you very much.
I thank the Minister of Public Works of El Salvador. The next speaker is the Acting Deputy Director for the sector on social sciences and the applications of United Nations education, scientific and cultural organization, Mr. Jack Harvard. I give you the floor.
Mesdames, Messieurs,
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, I have pleasure in bringing to this prestigious World Conference greetings from the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, and in conveying to the honorable delegates our organization's warmest wishes for the success of this conference. I have hardly any need to underline UNESCO's firm intention to play its due part within its own field of competence in the international community's collective efforts to promote in the whole world a truly human policy towards human settlements, and to support the efforts of national authorities to achieve this end. For the cause of habitat, the molding of an environment for human beings to live in their respective communities is in many ways the cause of UNESCO. In all countries, authorities are aware of the extreme seriousness of the problem which affects human settlements today, and even more of the considerable gravity of the threats to the future of man's habitat. If it is true that what is at stake is the development of settlements where in 25 years' time 6 billion human beings will live, but the pressure of the most immediate constraints could not make cultural or spiritual preoccupations a luxury, vain, or inopportune, provided such preoccupations embrace the cause of the whole of mankind, not of an artificially privileged minority. Whatever the development of existing towns, whatever the form and size of those that have to be built, it would be a grave error to plan human settlements which are not also, or above all, cultural testimony and a suitable environment for the development of those who live in them. It is true that our age has built urban complexes which do not deserve to be called towns. We should not be surprised, therefore, if these shapeless heaps of compartmentalized cells do not have much direction. But it's also not surprising that this monotony should be unacceptable to humans, especially to young people. It is precisely because they wish to live in settlements which are essentially places of exchange and creation that young people are now so interested in villages of the pre-industrial era and historical towns. This interest is characteristic of our time. It is a result of the cultural crisis of human settlements. The authors of the excellent paper submitted to this conference have made a point of mentioning this. The document devoted to recommendations concerning measures to be taken on the national level, after stating that the earth should be managed like a resource in the interest of the community, shows that this principle applies to the preservation of historical sites and monuments. In order to contribute to the discussion here on this subject, UNESCO would like to present to the conference a draft recommendation concerning the safeguarding of quarters, towns and sites, historic sites, and their integration within a modern environment. This project will be submitted to UNESCO's General Conference for approval next November. It states that the preservation of historic towns is, I quote, a basic factor in town planning and land development. It is not only out of respect for the achievements of our ancestors that we have a duty to preserve these towns, but also because they are a response to one of today's needs. They are almost the only things which, as is noted in the draft recommendation, provide the variety of life's background needed to match the diversity of society. Better still, they may well be the guarantee of tomorrow's town planning. From these general points, which I've just summarized, two things I think can be singled out which are remarkably in keeping with certain basic trends of the working documents of this conference. The first is that the preservation of urban or rural environment is no longer, if it ever was, the privilege of an elite. It is the inhabitants and the users, sometimes the most humble of them, who fight together willingly to protect the environment they prefer to live in and consequently the lifestyle they have chosen. Amongst the actions to be recommended by this Vancouver conference could be a study of the various ways, modes of such public participation, which would, I am sure, be of equally great interest both to urbanists and political leaders to develop active and well thought out participation on the part of the whole population is necessary in order to tighten social links and to develop a sense of responsibility. As far as concerns children of school age, who are naturally one of the main concerns of UNESCO, experience has shown only too well the inadequacy of stereotyped and simplistic conceptions, which make the school an artificial place, cut off from the existence of the community as a whole, instead of being the most important part of a true community center. The second lesson concerns cultural and social values characteristic to each nation and the enrichment of the world's cultural heritage. Delegates present here in Vancouver will, I think, subscribe to this enjoinder in document 74, Declaration of Principles. Diversity in the characteristics of human settlements reflecting cultural and aesthetic values must be respected and encouraged. It remains to demonstrate without ambiguity that these principles entail clear-cut condemnation of the preeminence still largely accorded to building and planning models which are termed international, but which in fact come from a very few industrialized countries. For these principles to be applied both in professional practice and in teaching, both imagination and persistence is needed. First, as regards the training of professionals. With regard to architecture and town planning, UNESCO has acquired experience which is continuously being reinforced through its close relations with professional associations, particularly with the International Union of Architects. The theoretical and practical training of architects and town planners will be the subject of an international meeting of experts organized by UNESCO next September in Chandigarh, in India. However, the training of administrators, technicians, and managers of human settlements is no less important. And in this, as yet inadequately explored field, UNESCO has had the honor of undertaking some significant experiments in cooperation with the United Nations Environment Programme. These experiments, carried out with the active assistance of national and local authorities, have taken the form of courses, exercises, and regional training sessions which have taken place since the beginning of the year in Indonesia, Argentina, Morocco, Ghana, and Ivory Coast. A meeting will be held in Budapest in a few weeks' time to evaluate this experience and to plan the next phase. Obviously, these two working meetings will put to good use the lessons which we will have learned here in Vancouver. One more half minute. Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, planning, construction, and administration of human settlements can never be improved by magisterial assistance granted from the outside. On the contrary, we can expect positive progress to be encouraged everywhere by competent and dedicated activity on the part of mobile and discrete teams paying close attention to the specific economic and social and cultural conditions prevailing in each region and country. It is in this spirit, sir, that UNESCO is prepared to cooperate fully in this international activity for which you are going to lay the foundations. Thank you, sir.
I thank the Acting Deputy Director for the Sector on Social Sciences and Applications of the United Nations Education, Scientific and Cultural Organization. I now give the floor to the Secretary for the conference for some announcements. Mr. Secretary.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, the Secretary would like to apologize for the fact that the translation wasn't right from France. We hope that we can fix it up by tomorrow.
We'll meet with the Rapporteur General at 6 p.m. in this hall. The Credential Committee will have its first meeting tomorrow afternoon, Friday, from 2 to 2:45 p.m. in Conference Room C, Pacific Ballroom in Hyatt, Vancouver. Just to remind, the membership of that Credential Committee is as follows: Belgium, Costa Rica, the Libyan Arab Republic, Mali, Mongolia, Pakistan, USSR, United States, and Venezuela. Concerning the regional group meetings, there will be a meeting of African group between 8:45 and 9:45 a.m. in Conference Room D in the Hotel Hyatt Regency. There will be also a meeting of Western European and other states between 9 a.m. and 9:45 a.m. in Conference Room E in Harborside. Chairmen of some committees have requested that the group meetings should end sharply before their own meeting. There has been cases that the group meetings have passed the time which have been allocated to them. Therefore, committees have started late. Therefore, it is requested that the room should be evacuated around 9:45 to prepare for the following meetings, for the official meetings. I understand that the rapporteur is here, if his friends is here, so he can have his meeting right away after the adjournment of this meeting. Thank you, Mr. President.
With this announcement, the meeting is adjourned.